The air around Windsor that morning felt heavy, as if the world itself sensed something was wrong. The palace guards stood at attention, their faces more tense than usual. News crews were already circling like hawks, but none of them knew the truth. Not yet. Inside the private wing, behind closed doors and drawn curtains, Prince William was sitting in silence, staring at the results that had just rewritten his future. It began with a whisper, a single phrase that escaped his lips, barely audible to the doctor in the room. "I will not survive this." Those words, spoken not with panic but quiet acceptance, echoed through the corridor like a curse. Because when a man like Prince William, the heir to the British throne, the embodiment of stability and hope, utters words like that, it shakes the world to its core. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But what exactly happened? What was it that broke the man who had carried the crown's burden so gracefully for decades? What diagnosis could possibly strip away his unshakable resolve? Tonight, we dive deep into the story Buckingham Palace tried to keep hidden. The story of how the future king faced his mortality and how the royal family prepared for the unthinkable. For years, William had seemed invincible. The Golden Prince, the dutiful son, the loyal husband, the caring father. Every smile, every handshake, every polished appearance painted the image of a man born for the role of king. But beneath the surface was exhaustion, physical, emotional, spiritual, the kind that no crown could heal. And it all began months before anyone noticed. It started with fatigue, a strange kind of tiredness that clung to him no matter how much he rested. Catherine, ever observant, noticed first. She'd watch him at breakfast, hands trembling slightly as he reached for his cup of tea. "You're working too much," she'd say softly, masking her worry with a smile. But he'd brush it off with his usual charm. "I'm fine, darling. The country needs me." How many times had those words been spoken by men in his lineage, each one carrying the same pride, the same denial, the same quiet burden? And yet, this time, something was different. There were nights he'd wake up drenched in sweat, unable to breathe. Days where he'd lose his balance after standing too quickly. His private secretary, alarmed, arranged for a checkup at a discreet clinic outside London. No press, no palace medical team, just William and the truth. When the results came in, everything stopped. He sat in the consultation room, eyes fixed on the doctor's face, watching it shift from professional calm to something close to sorrow. There are moments in life when time fractures, when before and after become two different worlds. This was his. The diagnosis, though not revealed to the public, was devastating enough that even the most optimistic prognosis came with a chilling phrase: limited time. He didn't react immediately. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply nodded and said, "Thank you for your honesty." Because that's who he was, measured, composed, royal even in crisis. But when he stepped outside the clinic, when the cold wind hit his face, something inside him shattered. He called Catherine. She picked up on the first ring, cheerful as always, until she heard his voice. "Kate, I need you to come home." From that moment, nothing was the same. The palace would later claim he was simply resting and taking time with family. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in. Royal aides were sworn to silence. Security tightened. Rumors of a family emergency began to swirl in the tabloids, but no one dared to suggest what it really was. Why? Because no one could imagine a Britain without him. Think about it. The monarchy has endured scandal, divorce, death, but the loss of William would mean something deeper. He wasn't just the next in line. He was the bridge between the old and the new, between Diana's compassion and Charles's tradition. He represented the monarchy's second chance. And now, that bridge was cracking. As the days turned into weeks, Catherine became his anchor. The couple withdrew from public life, their once visible smiles now carefully managed performances. Behind closed doors, she wept. There were nights she would sit by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering promises she knew she couldn't keep. "You'll get through this. You have to. The children need you." But sometimes, when she'd catch him looking out the window, lost in thought, she saw a quiet resignation in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving unfinished business, his father's trust, his children's innocence, his mother's legacy. And somewhere deep down, he feared history repeating itself. The cruel symmetry of Diana's son facing his own tragedy at nearly the same age she had been taken from the world did not escape him. That symmetry became the palace's nightmare. Because if the truth leaked, if the public found out their beloved prince was terminally ill, it could ignite an emotional storm that might consume the entire monarchy. Inside the royal household, meetings turned tense. King Charles, though publicly calm, was quietly devastated. He'd visit William late at night, the two men speaking in hushed tones. "I should have protected you," Charles once muttered, his voice trembling. William, weak but resolute, replied, "You gave me a purpose, father. Don't take that away now." There are few moments in life when a father sees his child's mortality before his own. For Charles, it was unbearable. And yet, royal protocol allowed no time for sentiment. There were succession plans to update, statements to draft, and appearances to maintain. The monarchy's survival depended on secrecy. Only a handful of insiders knew the full truth, and even fewer dared to speak of it. But secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. And this one was too big, too emotional, too tragic to stay buried forever. The public began to notice subtle changes. William's weight loss, his pale complexion, his absence from events he would never normally miss, military ceremonies, school visits, charity galas. Rumors multiplied like wildfire. He's ill. He's depressed. He's had an accident. The palace issued a carefully worded statement. The Prince of Wales is taking a period of private rest for health reasons. But rest doesn't last this long, does it? And rest doesn't usually come with the kind of fear you can see in a father's eyes. The British people, ever intuitive, began to sense it. Something was wrong. Something bigger than anyone dared say aloud. In moments like this, the press usually turns predatory. But this time, even they seemed hesitant, as if violating the privacy of a dying prince was too sacred a line to cross. And yet, whispers still found their way into the dark corners of online forums. Anonymous sources hinting that the palace is preparing for the inevitable. What could inevitable mean when it's about the future king? Days later, Catherine was spotted leaving a London hospital, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, her lips trembling as photographers shouted questions. She said nothing, just lowered her head and got into the car. That image, the poised Duchess, now visibly broken, spread across the world in hours. It was the moment the public's worry turned into collective grief. Meanwhile, inside the palace, William began writing letters. Not speeches, not statements. Letters, each one sealed in a plain white envelope. One for each of his children, one for his father, one for Catherine, one marked simply Britain, his handwriting shaky but elegant, his words filled with the wisdom of a man who had finally made peace with the inevitable. He wrote, "If I cannot be there to lead, let my life remind you what leadership truly means." He was preparing for goodbye, but even as his health declined, his sense of duty did not. Against medical advice, he made one final public appearance. It was at a children's hospital, a place he had supported for years. The cameras captured what no one could unsee. A frail prince forcing a smile, holding a young patient's hand, whispering, "You're braver than you think." It broke hearts worldwide. But those closest to him knew that moment wasn't for the cameras. It was for his mother. Because Diana had once said those exact same words in that same hospital decades earlier. A circle closed that day, a mother's legacy, fulfilled through her son. Afterward, when he returned home, Catherine helped him upstairs. He sat by the window, looking out over the garden, and whispered something that left her frozen in silence. "When I go, tell them I'm not afraid." She begged him not to talk like that. But deep down, she knew it was no longer denial, it was acceptance. Still, the story doesn't end there. Because the moment you think the royal family will protect their own, history reminds you of its cruelty. Behind the curtains, power shifts were already being discussed, succession plans redrafted, advisors positioning themselves for the inevitable vacuum. And through it all, William watched in quiet heartbreak, realizing the institution he had served so faithfully was preparing for a future without him. But it was what happened next that changed everything. A moment so shocking, so emotionally charged, it would alter the course of the monarchy forever. It began with a phone call that wasn't supposed to happen. A single vibration on a nightstand inside the royal physician's office. One message, 10 words long, that would send shockwaves through the most powerful family on earth. They have the report. The press will publish by morning. The doctor froze. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the ticking of the antique clock behind him. He knew what the report meant. It wasn't just another rumor about Prince William's health. It was the real thing. The medical diagnosis. The one sealed under royal confidentiality. The one only 3 people were supposed to know. And somehow, it had slipped out. Who leaked it? How? Why now? Those were the questions racing through his mind as he rushed down the hall toward the palace's secure line. But before he could reach it, another call came in, this time from Catherine's private secretary. Doctor, they already know. It's everywhere. Across London, newsroom lights flickered on. Phones rang. Journalists screamed for verification. Within minutes, headlines began appearing in digital drafts. Unconfirmed sources. Prince William facing serious health crisis. Royal Palace in panic over heir's condition. Doctors summoned to Windsor in early hours. But behind the walls of Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was far from sensational. It was suffocating. Catherine sat on the edge of their bed, still in her robe, staring blankly at her phone. The message had just come through from a friend in the media. She didn't need to open it. She already knew. She could feel the weight of the coming storm pressing against her chest. William stood by the window, hands gripping the curtain so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It's out, isn't it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded. "They're saying everything. They're saying you might not." Her voice broke before she could finish. He turned slowly, eyes filled with a mix of calm and sorrow. "Then it's begun," he whispered. "The day everything changes. Imagine being in that room for a second. The future king, not dressed in royal regalia, not smiling for cameras, but just a man in his 30s, pale from exhaustion, facing the news that the world was about to discover his most private pain. No palace, no protocol, no amount of power could shield him now. And yet, he didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't blame anyone. He simply sat down beside Catherine and said quietly, "We can't hide anymore." But the palace thought otherwise. Within 30 minutes, the royal communications team assembled an emergency meeting. Phones buzzed, printers roared, statements were drafted and deleted. Advisors argued over phrasing. One insisted, "We must deny." Another countered, "Denial will destroy us later." And in the midst of it all, an older staff member, someone who had served the Queen for decades, spoke with trembling authority. "If we lie now, we lose forever." That sentence silenced the room. Meanwhile, William's private physician confirmed what they had all feared. The diagnosis had been accessed through a hacked file on the Royal Medical Database. A single digital breach. One stolen document. And now, the world knew that Prince William's life was in danger. Catherine's mother, Carol, arrived an hour later. When she saw her daughter's face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled her into an embrace and whispered, "You hold him now, Katie. Don't let go." And for the next few hours, that's exactly what Catherine did. She sat beside William, her hand over his, as the dawn crept through the windows and the palace prepared for a war it couldn't win. Outside, the streets of London were already buzzing. Reporters camped near Kensington gates. Cameras pointed at every passing vehicle. The public woke to headlines that made their hearts stop. Tragic news: Prince William's health crisis. No details were confirmed, but the implication was enough. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #PrayForWilliam and #FutureKing began trending worldwide within an hour. Across the Atlantic, American news networks broke from regular programming. Developing story out of London. Prince William's condition has sparked concern within Buckingham Palace. Every screen, every phone, every feed was filled with his face. But what no one saw was the chaos behind those palace walls. Aides deleting emails. Security tightening communication lines. Lawyers preparing injunctions to stop further leaks. It was like watching a dam burst while everyone scrambled to hold it together with their bare hands. And in the middle of that storm, William did something unexpected. He ordered everyone to stop. Catherine tried to reason with him. "You need to rest, Will. Let the staff handle it." But he shook his head. "No, this is my life they're talking about. My family's future. I won't hide from the truth." He stood, shoulders trembling, and walked toward his study. On his desk sat the same fountain pen his mother once used to write her speeches. He picked it up and began to write. Not to the press, not to the people, but to his children. The words flowed like confession. If you ever read this, he wrote, know that being your father was the greatest honor of my life. The world may remember me as a prince, but you should remember me as a man who tried to be kind. He paused, staring at the photograph of his mother, Diana, that sat framed beside the desk. They never let her tell her story, he murmured. But maybe they'll let me tell mine. What kind of man prepares his children for goodbye before the world even knows what's wrong? What kind of courage does it take to face that truth and still smile for the cameras? That afternoon, the palace released a statement so carefully worded it only deepened the mystery. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales is undergoing a period of medical treatment and thanks the public for their concern and support. No diagnosis, no timeline, just silence wrapped in politeness. But silence can be deafening when the whole world is listening. By evening, speculation had reached fever pitch. Talk show hosts debated the severity of his condition. Social media insiders claimed to know the details. Theories ranged from exhaustion to rare genetic illness. Some even whispered the word no one dared say aloud: terminal. Inside their home, William and Catherine tried to shield their children. George, old enough to sense tension, asked quietly, "Is Daddy sick?" Catherine smiled faintly, holding back tears. "Daddy's just tired, sweetheart. He needs some rest." But children always know. They see what words hide. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, William sat alone on the balcony. The cold wind brushed against his face as he looked out toward the horizon. The London skyline twinkled in the distance, unaware that one of its brightest lights was dimming. He whispered into the darkness, "How do I say goodbye to all this?" The next morning, the British press officially published the story. The front pages carried his image with headlines of concern and sorrow. Crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, leaving flowers and notes. It was as if the nation was collectively holding its breath. King Charles called his son immediately. "They've made it public," he said. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight he carried as both a monarch and a father. William replied quietly, "Then maybe it's time they saw who I really am." He wasn't interested in pity. He wasn't even angry. What he wanted was control, not of his fate, but of his story. Later that day, he made a decision that stunned his advisors. He would record a message. A private video, not for broadcast yet. Something for his children, for the future, for Britain. A message that would explain everything when the time came. He sat in front of a camera, his expression calm, his voice steady but fragile. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I didn't make it." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "But please, don't remember me for what I lost. Remember me for what I tried to give." That recording, known later only to a handful of insiders, would become one of the most haunting royal relics ever created. Meanwhile, Catherine's focus turned to protection. She had only one mission now: to keep their children away from the madness. She canceled all public appearances, moved the family to Windsor, and limited all outside contact. "We will live quietly," she told the staff. "We will live as a family." But living quietly is impossible when you're royal. Helicopters hovered overhead. Paparazzi followed their every move. Even family friends were questioned by reporters pretending to care. The walls of privacy were collapsing fast. And then, something strange happened. An email arrived at one of the UK's largest newspapers. The sender was anonymous, but the contents were explosive. A scan of the official medical report, signed by the royal physician, stamped with palace insignia. It included words no one was prepared to see. Prognosis, non-recoverable. Estimated survival, undetermined. It confirmed everything. Editors panicked. Lawyers called emergency meetings. But it was too late. The document spread like wildfire through private channels and eventually leaked online. Millions saw it. And by the time the palace legal team acted, the damage was irreversible. The monarchy was exposed. Inside Windsor, Catherine read the report on her tablet. Her hands shook. William, sitting beside her, gently took it from her and closed it. "It doesn't change anything," he said softly. But it did. It changed everything. Because now, there was no hiding. The truth was out, and the world was watching. Still, amid the chaos, something unexpected stirred, a wave of compassion. Across the country, people lit candles. Messages poured in from around the world. "We love you, William. "Stay strong, Catherine. You're not alone." It was the same outpouring of love the world had once given Diana, and for a moment, it felt as though her spirit was watching over them again. But peace never lasts long in the palace, because while the public wept, certain forces inside the institution were already calculating. What if William couldn't continue his duties? Who would step in? Who would take control of the throne if the unthinkable happened? The monarchy's survival instinct was awakening, and that instinct, as history had shown, can be cruel. As midnight approached, William received a private call. The voice on the other end was calm but cold. "You should know," it said. "Plans are being discussed without your consent." He frowned. "What kind of plans?" The line went silent for a second. Then the voice whispered, "Succession." And that was the moment he realized. His battle wasn't just against illness anymore. It was against time, power, and the very system he was born to serve. Have you ever watched someone you love pretend to be strong for the world while falling apart in silence? That was Catherine, the Princess of Wales, in those days when the palace lights never seemed to turn off. Behind every composed smile at the gates, every neatly pressed coat, and every measured public word was a woman holding back a storm no one could see. It wasn't just the diagnosis that broke her, it was the helplessness. Catherine had always believed she could fix things. Broken schedules, broken hearts, broken families. She'd mended them all with grace and patience. But how do you fix time? How do you stop it from slipping away when the man you love looks at you and says quietly, "I don't think I'll see another Christmas"? In public, she carried herself with poise. Cameras flashed, fans cheered, commentators praised her unwavering strength. But when the doors shut and the children were asleep, that strength dissolved into tears that soaked her pillow. Her nights became a pattern of silent breakdowns, crying not out of fear, but out of disbelief. Because even though the world called her the future queen, she couldn't save her king. The first time she truly broke down, it wasn't dramatic. It was painfully human. She was sitting at the dining table after putting George and Charlotte to bed. The palace had finally gone quiet. A late breeze slipped through the curtains. William was asleep on the sofa, his breathing shallow, his face pale from another round of treatment. A half-empty mug of herbal tea sat beside him, untouched. That's when she whispered to no one, "This can't be how our story ends." The next morning, she put on her best coat, brushed her hair, and smiled for the cameras outside a children's charity event. Reporters shouted questions. "How's the prince doing? Is he getting better?" She smiled that carefully practiced royal smile and answered, "We're taking things one day at a time." But her eyes said everything. After the event, as soon as she was back inside the car, she exhaled a shaky breath and pressed her palms together as if in prayer. "One day at a time," she repeated under her breath. One day, her staff noticed the change. The once vibrant Duchess who loved engaging with people now moved with a quiet, almost haunted grace. She still did her duties, still showed up, but her laughter, her real laughter, was gone. Even the palace photographers whispered among themselves that she looked thinner, paler, more distant. One of them said, "It's as if she's here, but her heart isn't." And maybe it wasn't, because part of her heart was trapped in fear. Fear that every time William left for a meeting, it might be the last. Fear that every "I'm fine" from him was a lie to protect her. Fear that one morning she'd wake up and he wouldn't. There's something uniquely cruel about watching someone fade in slow motion. You can't grieve because they're still there, but you can't relax because you know they're leaving. That's where Catherine lived, between presence and loss. But she never let the children see her cry. George would peek into their room some nights, asking, "Is Daddy feeling better?" And Catherine would smile and say, "He's resting, sweetheart. He's getting stronger." Then she'd kiss him goodnight, close the door, and lean against it, clutching her chest to hold in the sob that wanted to escape. She began keeping a journal, not for publicity, not for posterity, but for survival. Page after page of raw emotion, prayers, and promises. "If you have to go," she wrote one night, "please take the pain with you, not the love." She kept that journal locked in a drawer, hidden from the press and even from William, who she knew would only worry more if he saw it. Still, there were moments when she let the mask slip, just a little. Like the day her mother visited. Carol Middleton, strong and pragmatic, had always been her anchor. But when she walked into that palace and saw her daughter's trembling hands, even she broke. "Katie," she said softly, "you've always carried everyone else's burdens. It's time to let someone carry yours." Catherine's lips quivered. "I can't. If I fall apart, who's left to hold it all together?" Carol took her hands and whispered, "Then at least cry when no one's watching. It's not weakness. It's love trying to breathe." And that's exactly what she did, behind locked doors, away from cameras, away from courtiers. Her tears became her rebellion against the palace's silence. Because make no mistake, the palace had turned cold. The communications team focused on damage control. Statements were edited until they sounded mechanical. The human side of the crisis was erased in favor of maintaining stability. When Catherine suggested releasing a personal message of gratitude to the public, one senior aide shut her down. "It would make the prince appear weak," he said, "and we cannot afford weakness." That was the moment she realized. The institution wasn't grieving with them. It was managing them. She stopped attending briefings after that. Stopped listening to PR advisors who cared more about optics than emotion. She told her private secretary, "From now on, my priority is William, not the crown." It was the first open act of defiance she'd ever shown, and it was the beginning of a quiet power shift within the royal household. But her defiance didn't go unnoticed. Word reached senior courtiers, and whispers began circulating that the princess is becoming emotional. Emotional, such a polite word for a woman watching her husband slip away. One advisor suggested a temporary retreat for the couple to ease speculation, but Catherine refused. "We're not disappearing," she said. "We're living." Still, living came with a cost. Every time William coughed, she flinched. Every time his doctors arrived unannounced, her stomach dropped. She began memorizing the sounds of his breathing at night, the rhythm of his footsteps in the hall, the tone of his laughter, terrified that one day those sounds would stop. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the garden, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. She joined him in silence. After a long pause, he said, "Do you think they know?" She frowned. "Who?" "The stars. Do you think they know when it's time for someone to go?" Her throat tightened. "Don't say that." He smiled faintly. "I'm not afraid, Kate. You shouldn't be either." She reached for his hand. "I'm not afraid of you dying," she said softly. "I'm afraid of living without you." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could be. That night, after he fell asleep, she went to the chapel inside the palace. No guards, no cameras, just her and the faint glow of candlelight. She knelt, whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood. "Please," she murmured, "give me more time with him. Don't take him yet." Her voice cracked. "Take my peace, take my sleep, take everything, but not him." Her tears hit the cold stone floor, and she stayed there until dawn. But dawn didn't bring peace. It brought news. Early the next morning, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope. Catherine opened it, expecting medical updates, but instead, it was a notice from the Royal Council. Her Royal Highness is requested to refrain from making unauthorized public appearances or statements regarding His Royal Highness's condition. It was a warning, a silencing order disguised in polite formality. She stared at it in disbelief. "They're controlling our grief," she whispered. "They're afraid of compassion." William saw the letter later and laughed bitterly. "They can control my title," he said, "but they'll never control how much you love me." But even as he tried to comfort her, his body was growing weaker. His once commanding voice now carried fatigue. His hands trembled when he signed documents. Catherine noticed everything, and she hated herself for noticing, because every sign of decline was a reminder of the clock ticking down. Then came the day that broke her completely. It was supposed to be a simple family lunch at Windsor. The children were laughing, chasing each other across the garden. William had joined them briefly, smiling despite his exhaustion. But when he tried to stand, his legs gave out. Catherine screamed his name as guards rushed in. For a few seconds, he was unresponsive, just lying there, eyes closed, pale as porcelain. He survived the collapse, but the doctor's warning afterward was clear. He must rest. Any further strain could accelerate deterioration. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand as the rain pattered against the window. "You scared me," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "You've always been brave, Kate." She shook her head. "Not anymore." He opened his eyes, glassy with exhaustion. Then be brave for them. For George, Charlotte, Louis. Promise me that. She swallowed hard. I promise. But promises made in fear are fragile things. Because even as she said it, she knew she wasn't ready to keep it. She wasn't ready for goodbye. Still, she kept up the illusion for the world. Royal photographers captured what they called a tender moment as she held William's arm during a public outing. They called it love in adversity. But if you looked closely, really closely, you'd see her fingers gripping his sleeve not for affection, but to keep him from collapsing. Every smile she gave the cameras was a battle against breaking. And then, one night, after another exhausting day of pretending everything was fine, she found a note on her pillow. William had written it during one of his sleepless nights. I know you're scared. So am I. But if love could heal me, I'd already be cured. Her tears fell on the paper as she whispered, "You will be my love." Somehow. But the truth was dawning on her. The fairy tale was unraveling. And as much as she tried to hold it together, she knew something inside the palace had shifted. There were whispers of decisions being made without her knowledge. Plans being drawn up for succession management. The news reached him just after dawn. King Charles was sitting alone in his study at Clarence House, reviewing briefings for an upcoming Commonwealth summit, when his private secretary knocked once. Firm, hesitant, different. He looked up, sensing the weight in the man's posture before a word was spoken. "Sir," the secretary said softly, "it's confirmed. The diagnosis is authentic. It's serious." For a long moment, Charles didn't move. The only sound was the slow crackle of the fireplace and the faint hum of London traffic outside the window. He'd spent his entire life preparing to carry the burden of the crown, but no one prepares a father to lose a son. He dismissed the secretary with a nod and turned toward the window. Morning light spilled across the desk, highlighting framed photographs of happier times. William's wedding day, the christening of George, a smiling Diana beside two small boys in matching sweaters. Those images, once a source of pride, now felt like reminders of everything he might soon lose. He whispered to himself, almost involuntarily, "Not him. Not my boy." Charles had lived through scandal, ridicule, the loss of his former wife, and decades of public judgment. But nothing hit harder than that single sentence from the report, non-recoverable. For a man who believed in order and legacy, it was chaos made flesh. He poured himself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly, and sat back in his chair. What was he supposed to do? Announce it to the world? Hide it in hope? Every decision seemed wrong. The monarchy demanded composure. Fatherhood demanded heartbreak. That afternoon, he canceled all engagements and drove, without a word to the press office, to Windsor. The drive felt endless. Every traffic light, every passing landmark, seemed to mock the ticking clock inside his mind. By the time he arrived, his knuckles were white against the steering wheel. William was resting when he entered. Catherine stood from her chair, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. "He's been asking for you," she whispered. Charles nodded and stepped closer, suddenly unsure how to greet his son. Bow. Embrace? Words? Titles crumble when death stands in the doorway. William opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "You came." Charles tried to smile back, but his throat closed. "Of course I did, my dear boy. How are you feeling?" William chuckled softly, a sound more like air than laughter. Like someone who's run out of tomorrows. That broke the king. He turned away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks, but his voice trembled. "Don't talk like that. We'll find a way." William shook his head. "You can't negotiate with fate, father." For the next hour, they spoke, not as monarch and heir, but as man and son. William told him about the treatment, the pain, the exhaustion. Charles listened, nodding occasionally, offering a hand on his shoulder. He'd always struggled to express affection. Royal training had taught him restraint. But that night, restraint felt like cruelty. "I never said it enough," Charles admitted finally. "I'm proud of you, William. I always have been." William's eyes glistened. "I know, father. I just wish we'd had more time to say it." They sat in silence. 2 generations of duty-bound men, finally stripped of ceremony, reduced to what they had always been, father and son, separated by titles, reunited by pain. Later, when William fell asleep, Charles lingered beside the bed, studying his face in the dim light. The boy who once ran through Balmoral fields now lay pale and fragile beneath hospital white sheets. "You're not supposed to go first," Charles whispered. "You're supposed to outlive me. You're supposed to fix what I couldn't." That night, he returned to Balmoral alone. The Scottish air was crisp, the kind of cold that clears your head but stings your heart. He walked the grounds where he and Diana once brought the children to play. The memories flooded back, the laughter, the tiny footprints in wet grass, William's voice calling, "Come on, Papa." He stopped near the riverbank, looking at the reflection of the moon on the water. "You warned me," he murmured into the dark. "You said the crown takes everything." His words disappeared into the wind. Back at the castle, he sat at his writing desk and began a letter addressed simply to my son. It wasn't a royal directive or political instruction. It was confession. He wrote about regret, missing birthdays, prioritizing duty over fatherhood, the things he never said after Diana's death. He wrote, "If I had one wish, it would be to trade places with you. But the world rarely gives kings their wishes." He sealed the envelope with his signet ring and locked it in his private drawer. No one would read it until he was gone. In the days that followed, Charles's demeanor shifted. Outwardly, he remained the same calm monarch, attending state briefings, greeting diplomats. But insiders noticed subtle cracks. His hands shaking slightly during speeches, the long pauses before signing documents, the vacant look in his eyes during meetings. The courtiers whispered, "The king is grieving the living." Camilla tried to comfort him. Over breakfast, she said gently, "You can't bear this alone, darling. Let people in." He looked up from his untouched tea. "I've spent 70 years preparing for duty, not grief." She reached across the table. "Then perhaps it's time to learn." That afternoon, he asked to see the Archbishop of Canterbury. The meeting was private, but according to one insider, Charles confessed something shocking. "I believe this is my punishment," he said. "For every choice I made that hurt Diana. For every moment I placed the crown above my family." The Archbishop reportedly told him, "Your Majesty, guilt is a heavy chain. Let it break here." But Charles only stared at the cross on the wall and replied, "It's not chains I feel, Archbishop. It's prophecy." Because in one of Diana's old letters, hidden among her belongings, there had been a line that haunted him. "The heir will suffer for the sins of the crown." He dismissed it as poetic nonsense back then. But now, it felt like fate collecting its debt. That night, the king couldn't sleep. He paced his private quarters, replaying the timeline in his head. The leak, the diagnosis, the headlines, the outpouring of sympathy, and beneath it all, the creeping whisper that maybe the monarchy itself was cursed. Was it coincidence that tragedy seemed to visit every generation? Was it chance, or something darker? He poured himself a small drink and stood by the window, looking out toward Westminster's lights. "I've spent my life defending this institution," he muttered. "And yet it's the one thing I'd burn to save him." When dawn came, he made a decision, one no aide expected. He canceled all scheduled appearances and summoned his top advisors to the palace. "No press, no cameras. I want a private council," he ordered. They gathered around the long oak table as he spoke quietly but firmly. "We must prepare for all outcomes," he said. "If the worst happens, the transition must be seamless." One advisor hesitated. "Your Majesty, with respect, isn't that premature?" Charles looked him dead in the eye. "When it's your child, nothing is premature." Afterward, when everyone had left, Charles stayed behind, head bowed in exhaustion. On the table before him lay two folders, one labeled Succession Contingency, the other Personal Matters. He reached for the second. Inside was the sealed letter from the royal physician, the full report, unedited. He read it once more, slowly, his eyes tracing every word until he reached the final line. "The prognosis remains uncertain but unfavorable." He folded the letter carefully and whispered, "So it ends with uncertainty." The following day, Charles visited Westminster Abbey privately. There were no photographers, no entourage, just a grieving father walking through centuries of history, the echo of his footsteps, mingling with the ghosts of monarchs past. At the tomb of the unknown warrior, he knelt, closed his eyes, and said, "If it's my blood you want, take mine. Spare him." A tear fell onto the marble. Few people ever saw King Charles cry. That was one of the rare times. When he returned to Buckingham Palace, a red envelope awaited him on his desk, marked confidential, for His Majesty's eyes only. It had been hand-delivered by the royal physician. Inside was a single-page update. William's condition had worsened. Further complications, it read. Immediate rest required. Prognosis remains guarded. Charles set the paper down slowly, exhaled, and looked toward the portrait of Diana hanging on the opposite wall. You always protected him, he whispered. Do it again. He sat in silence for several minutes before pressing the intercom. Tell the Lord Chamberlain I wish to postpone all public events until further notice. May I ask the reason, Your Majesty? The aide replied. Charles's voice broke slightly. Family comes first. Later that night, he wrote again, not as king, but as father, friend, sinner seeking mercy. His pen scratched across the paper. They tell me I must prepare for the future. But how do I plan a future that does not include my son? He folded the letter, placed it beside the one he'd written earlier, and blew out the candle. The room fell dark except for the moonlight spilling across his desk, illuminating those two envelopes like ghosts of promises unkept. Outside, the palace clock struck midnight. And just as it did, the phone on his desk rang, a direct line from Windsor. He answered immediately. Yes. A pause. Then the voice on the other end whispered, Your Majesty, it's the prince. He's awake, but he's asking for you. Charles froze. At this hour? Yes, sir. He said it's urgent. The king rose, heart pounding, already reaching for his coat. Whatever William had to say couldn't wait till morning. Father, William whispered, his voice rasping through the phone. I need to tell you the truth about what they found. Those words sliced through King Charles like a blade. He was already on his way out the door, coat thrown over his shoulders, not waiting for the driver. Within an hour, the king's convoy pulled through the gates of Windsor under a gray, sleepless sky. The courtyard was eerily quiet. No photographers, no aides, just the cold hum of engines and the distant cry of morning birds. He stepped inside, his shoes echoing on the marble floor. Catherine was waiting at the top of the staircase, her face pale, her eyes swollen but resolute. He's awake, she whispered. But he's not himself tonight. Charles nodded, placing a trembling hand on the railing as they walked together toward the bedroom where his son waited. The door creaked open, and there he was, William, sitting upright, blanket draped over his legs, the faint glow of the lamp painting sharp shadows across his face. He looked older, not by years, but by burdens. Father, William said quietly, gesturing to the chair beside the bed. Thank you for coming. Charles sat, his hands clasped tightly. Always. You said you needed to tell me something. Something about the diagnosis? William hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window as if the truth itself frightened him. They think it's genetic, he said at last. Something dormant. Passed down. The king frowned. Genetic? From where? That's the problem, William replied. They can't trace it. It's rare, unpredictable. But there's one theory. He paused, voice trembling slightly. They believe it might be connected to what happened to Mother. Charles's breath caught. Diana? William nodded. Not her accident. Before that, the stress, the anxiety, the years of emotional strain, it may have activated something dormant in our bloodline. The doctors said chronic trauma can manifest generations later. They called it an inherited syndrome. Neurological and systemic. Charles leaned back in his chair, his face draining of color. So you're saying your body is carrying the cost of everything this family's endured? William gave a faint, broken laugh. Seems the crown really does leave its mark, doesn't it? Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than ever. Charles finally spoke, his voice low. Have they given you a timeline? William stared at his hands. They can't. It could be months. Could be years. But they warn me, once certain symptoms appear, they don't reverse. The king swallowed hard, his throat dry. What symptoms? William looked up, his eyes glassy. Memory lapses. Muscle tremors. Loss of balance. It starts small, then grows faster. The body forgets itself. Catherine, standing quietly in the doorway, turned away, pressing her hand against her mouth. Charles sat frozen, his mind spinning between disbelief and guilt. He wanted to reject it outright, to declare it impossible. But deep down, he knew. This family had carried pain for generations, hidden under crowns and ceremonies, never healing, only passing it on. It's not just an illness, Father, William continued softly. It's a legacy, a curse of silence, of pressure, of duty without rest. Charles closed his eyes, a tear escaping before he could stop it. And now you bear the weight of all of it. William nodded. I don't blame you. I blame the system that made us this way. The king exhaled shakily, then whispered, then let me carry it now. Let me face it publicly. I can take the scandal. William shook his head firmly. No. If you do that, the monarchy collapses under sympathy, not strength. They need hope, not heartbreak. But what about truth? Charles asked. William smiled faintly. Truth can wait. It always does in this family. For a moment, they sat in silence. Father and son, trapped in the cycle of duty that had defined their bloodline. Then William reached under his pillow and pulled out a folder, thick and sealed with a hospital stamp. He handed it to his father. This is everything. The scans, the reports, the genetic analysis. It's not for the press. It's for you. Charles hesitated before taking it. Why me? Because I don't trust anyone else with it. And because there's something strange in there. The king opened the folder carefully, scanning the pages. At first, everything looked like standard medical jargon. Chemical markers, family health history, test results. But then, one section caught his eye. Subject shows anomalous markers consistent with previously unidentified hereditary mutation. And under that, comparison with previous royal archives requested. He frowned. What archives? William's voice dropped to a whisper. The ones locked in the royal vault. The old medical records from generations ago. The ones even Mother wasn't allowed to see. Charles's heart sank. He knew exactly what William meant. The sealed records, hidden after the mysterious illnesses that plagued past monarchs, quietly buried to preserve the image of royal perfection. They're testing to see if it's the same condition that afflicted George III, William added. The one they called madness. Charles froze. The implications hit like lightning. That was centuries ago. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting history doesn't die. Father, William interrupted. It just waits for a new face. The air went still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Catherine stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. They told us it affects the nervous system. Mood, coordination, memory. It explains the headaches, the fatigue, the fainting. Charles rubbed his temples, overwhelmed. And if the press finds out, they'll think it's hereditary insanity all over again. William nodded slowly. Which is why this has to stay between us. Until I decide otherwise. The king's chest tightened. You shouldn't face this alone. I'm not alone, William replied, glancing at Catherine. But I need time to understand it before the world turns it into spectacle. For a long moment, Charles said nothing. Then he rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the palace grounds bathed in moonlight. You know, he said quietly, your mother once told me the same thing, that the crown would either make you or destroy you. I prayed for the first. I fear she was right about the second. William's gaze softened. She'd want you to forgive yourself. Charles turned, his eyes glistening. How can I, when every decision I made built the world that's killing you? No answer came. Only the faint hum of medical equipment in the corner. Later that night, when the king returned to Buckingham Palace, he placed the folder on his desk and stared at it for hours. The candlelight flickered across the royal crest stamped on the cover, casting strange shadows across the wall. An inherited mutation. The phrase replayed in his mind like a curse. He opened his drawer, retrieved Diana's old letter again, the one she wrote years before her death, and read her words slowly. One will bear the burden of truth, the other, the cost of silence. He had always assumed she meant their marriage. But now, he wondered if she'd been writing about their sons. Outside, London slept in ignorance. Inside the palace, a father faced the cruelest truth of all. His bloodline was crumbling from within. As the clock struck 2, Charles picked up the phone and called his most trusted advisor. Find the archives, he said. The old medical ones. The ones from George III's era. I need them tonight. The advisor hesitated. That's a high-level clearance, Your Majesty. Those documents are classified even to Parliament. Then unclassify them, Charles snapped. This is not about the state, it's about my son. An hour later, couriers arrived carrying aged, dust-covered boxes from the royal vaults beneath Windsor. Inside were yellowed documents, brittle pages, and medical notes dating back over 200 years. The language was archaic, but the patterns were there: symptoms, behavior, decline. And at the bottom of one file, an entry written by the royal physician of 1788. The condition appears cyclical, recurring in heirs with direct descent. The malady hides for generations, then returns with intensity. It is as if the crown itself awakens it. Charles's hands trembled as he read. He whispered to himself, "Dear God, it's the same." He sat there until morning, watching the sun rise over the palace gardens, the first rays touching the crown resting on its display shelf. For the first time in his life, he hated the sight of it. He realized then that the crown wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a vessel for pain, passing silently from one heir to the next, demanding sacrifice. And this time, the sacrifice was his son. But before he could decide what to do with the truth, a quiet knock came at his door. A young aide stepped in, face pale. "Your Majesty," he said hesitantly, "you should turn on the television." Charles did. On every screen, across every channel, an image appeared. Prince William, pale and trembling, captured leaving a private clinic. The leak was no longer rumor. It was real. The world had seen his fragility. Who breaks the silence when silence is all that keeps a kingdom standing? That was the question burning across breakfast tables, newsrooms, and encrypted group chats the morning the photo dropped. A single frame. William stepping out of a private clinic, face one under the brim of a cap, one hand braced against the door as if gravity had turned against him. It wasn't supposed to exist. No camera crews had been scheduled. No pool photographer had been cleared. Yet there it was. Proof the palace could no longer hide behind phrases like rest and routine treatment. Who took it? Who sold it? Who wanted the world to see the future king like that? The newsroom at the biggest paper in Britain felt like a live wire. Monitors glowed with drafts, legal notes, and a blur of Slack pings that sounded like hail on a tin roof. In a corner office, a woman with steel gray hair and the posture of a retired colonel stared at the image for a long time before turning to her deputy. "Where did this come from?" she asked. The deputy swallowed. "Anonymous transfer. Anonymous account. The metadata's been scrubbed." "Of course it has." She leaned forward, tapping the image with a manicured nail. "There's a reflection on the car window. Enhance it." He frowned. "That's not CSI." "Enhance it," she repeated. Minutes later, a technician zoomed, sharpened, balanced shadows, and drew out a ghostly shape in the reflection. Not a paparazzo hiding in the hedges. Not a crowd. A single figure on the curb. Head down. Press badge tucked under a scarf. Someone who shouldn't have been there at all. Someone tipped off. The editor's eyes narrowed. "Call the palace. Ask them for comment. Ask who was on duty at the rear entrance between 6 and 8 a.m. yesterday. Ask which staffers had clearance. And ask them why the future king is leaving a clinic with no official escort." The deputy hesitated. "They'll stonewall." "Then let them stonewall loudly." She paused. "And reach out to our friends across the channel. Someone over there has the second angle." Across town, in a small flat with cheerful wallpaper and an anxious houseplant, a junior communications officer from the palace watched her phone pulse on the table. She hadn't slept. Her hands shook every time she picked up the device. One message from an unknown number kept reappearing like a phantom. "You did the right thing." Had she? Was there a right thing when the wrong thing was silence? Last week, she delivered a set of routine briefing papers to a senior aide. Nothing unusual, except one page had stuck in the folder spine and slipped free when the aide tossed the folder on his desk. It fluttered to the floor face up. A physician's note with a red stamp and two phrases that cut through her like glass. Non-recoverable. Prognosis unfavorable. She wasn't supposed to see it. She wasn't supposed to know. But knowledge is invasive. It sets down roots. It asks questions grown-ups say you shouldn't ask. Why are we lying? Why are we pretending he will be fine when the paper says he may not be? Why are we planning garden parties and photo calls as if December is guaranteed? She told herself she would do nothing. She told herself duty meant discretion. Then she saw Catherine leaving the hospital, jaw clenched, sunglasses on, the curve of her mouth fighting tears the public would never be allowed to acknowledge. That's when something inside the junior officer cracked. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's last weeks, when doctors said there was time and there wasn't. Maybe it was the way royal language turned into gauze, soft, opaque, smothering. Maybe it was the late-night call from a number that knew her name, her role, her calendar. "We know you're decent. We know you want truth. We can help you tell it." So she'd passed along one detail. No diagnosis, no names. Just, he is very ill. He is not winning. She hit send and felt like she'd jumped into a lake in winter. Numbness followed, then clarity. She would be anonymous. She would not be a traitor. She would be a witness. It took 3 days for the story to grow teeth. First the blurry photo, then the inbox flood, then the second image, shot from the opposite curb, sharper, crueler. William's profile hollowed by fatigue. A man holding on. By noon, every television studio had a live graphics package. A timeline. A panel of doctors who didn't know the details but knew enough biology to look grave on camera. Former courtiers emerged to say nothing in long, eloquent sentences. The country's collective throat tightened. Inside the palace, a war room assembled. Heavy wood, heavy curtains, heavy denial. A circle of advisors, each with a different plan to manage the unmanageable. The head of communications proposed a calibrated statement acknowledging a temporary health challenge and requesting privacy. The private secretary advocated immediate legal action against the outlets publishing the images. The Lord Chamberlain argued for silence. We do not dignify rumors. Silence is easier than truth. It's also louder. Catherine stood at the edge of the room, fingers laced, face composed but drained. She had dressed in navy, a steady color, the color of authority, and she listened as powerful men debated how her husband's mortality should be phrased for public consumption. When the debate reached a fever pitch, she spoke so softly the room had to lean in. People aren't crying because they know everything, she said. They're crying because they know nothing, and that's crueler. The Lord Chamberlain straightened. With respect, Your Royal Highness, compassion may undermine stability. Catherine's eyes did not flinch. Compassion is stability. The room did not applaud. The room recalculated. At 3:17 p.m., the palace released a statement. Measured, clean, almost antiseptic. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales has been receiving medical care for a condition requiring ongoing treatment. He remains dedicated to his duties and is grateful for the outpouring of public support. The family asks that their privacy be respected. It landed as intended, a soft blanket thrown over a bonfire. The flames dimmed. They did not die, because 30 minutes later, a new leak emerged. Not a photograph this time. An email. It was short, unmistakable, from a palace domain, time-stamped from the early hours of a week ago, addressed to a senior tabloid editor. The subject line read, Contingency Planning Brief. The body read, Please be prepared for a narrative shift concerning the prince's role in coming months. We will guide the public conversation in phases to avoid alarm. Guide the public conversation in phases. What did that mean? The editor who received it knew exactly what it meant, and so did anyone who'd ever watched a scandal curated into a story about resilience. It meant talking points. It meant phrases like bravery, inspiring fight, in good spirits. It meant the word journey, which newspapers use when the word decline is too naked to print. But this time, the email itself was the scandal. Proof that the palace wasn't just holding its breath, it was choreographing how the country should breathe. Within minutes, the email hit social media. It racked up 1 million impressions in an hour. The hashtag shifted from speculation to skepticism. Are we being managed? When did caring require a script? And still the question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Who was leaking? Inside the palace, the second war room formed, the internal one. Security and IT specialists mapped logins, traced access, cross-checked timestamps. The building's Wi-Fi logs, printer histories, CCTV placements. Who downloaded what? Who printed what? Who went where? On a whiteboard, someone wrote 3 roles: medical liaison, private office, communications. Lines connected names like a spider web. Each line tightened another knot inside Catherine's chest. By sunset, a short list emerged, for people with access to the language that appeared in the leaked email. 2 men in their 50s with a fondness for antique pens and parliamentary procedure. 1 woman known for impenetrable silence and black notebooks. And the junior officer with the anxious plant. They brought her in last. She sat at a small table in a room lined with portraits of people who'd learned to keep their faces still in public. A senior investigator asked for her phone. She handed it over. He asked for her passcode. She told him. He scrolled, expression unreadable, until he reached a folder of recently deleted files. Drafts, he asked. She nodded. What did you send? She swallowed. One sentence. No attachments. No names. Why? The truth fought with survival in the space of one heartbeat. Because pretending is cruel. He looked at her for a long time. You understand what you've done. Do you? She whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He slid a form across the table. Confidentiality violations, disciplinary process, potential criminal referral under the Official Secrets Act. She stared at the paper and saw her future collapse into meetings with lawyers and headlines that would call her a turncoat. She signed. Outside that room, a decision had already been made. The palace would brief select editors off the record that the culprit had been found and that the matter had been addressed internally. The monarchy, upright again. The narrative, delicately retuned. Only one problem. She hadn't sent the photograph. And she hadn't sent the email. Who did? In a midtown office with a view of the Thames, the steel-haired editor took a call on a landline she only used when secrets were at stake. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't take notes. When she hung up, she stood very still, then whispered to herself, not a junior, a senior. That night, she published a piece with 3 sentences that detonated like charges under the palace floorboards. The leak was not the act of a rogue junior, but originated from within the upper structure of royal administration. It described coordinated intent to accelerate public acclamation to a reduced role for the prince. Coordinated intent. Accelerate acclamation. Reduced role. Even without names, the meaning was clear. This wasn't an accident. It was a rehearsal. Out on the streets, people who'd left work early to light candles for William suddenly felt as if their grief had been scheduled without their consent. In living rooms, eyes flicked from the images of a fragile man to the words of a cold machine. And online, the mood shifted from sorrow to something more volatile. If they're planning to reduce his role, who fills it? That's where the leak became a quake. Not just about empathy, but about power. At Windsor, William watched the coverage from the arm of a sofa, a throw blanket over his knees. The film of the clinic door closing. The talking heads. The editor's coy phrasing. He listened to the language like a man who can hear faint thunder beyond the hills. Catherine muted the television. They think it's a plan. William didn't look away from the screen. It is a plan. Her breath caught. Yours? His eyes flicked to hers. Apology and resignation in equal measure. No. In another wing, a small meeting convened without them. Not a full council. Not an official committee. A conversation among 2 courtiers with 30 years' experience, a private secretary who'd outlasted for crises, and a senior legal advisor whose face never cracked no matter how hard the day pressed down on it. The private secretary spoke first. We must stabilize the line of succession. The legal advisor nodded. We must stabilize the perception of the line of succession. That too, the secretary said. The oldest courtier, who remembered the summer the nation nearly revolted over the grief of a princess, cleared his throat. Perception can't outrun affection. If the country feels we are shuffling pieces while the prince suffers, we will lose more than control. We will lose love. The private secretary's voice dropped. We may have to risk it. Why? The courtier asked. Because time is moving. In a cottage not far from the main house, a lamp glowed in a small living room. The junior officer sat with a cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at the non-committal statement the palace had released about resolving an internal matter. She should have felt relief that her name hadn't been dragged through the morning shows. She felt nothing. Or rather, she felt too much to name. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. Same message. You did the right thing. She typed, "Who are you?" A long pause. Then, someone who knows a coronation plan when they see one. She set the phone down like it had burned her. Far away, the steel-haired editor looked at a second message from a different source. A draft calendar. Color-coded. Blocks of time marked in neutral words that meant, in practice, reduction. Fewer public duties for William. More for others. A quiet redistribution. She read it twice, then made 2 phone calls. One to a competitor she respected when the story was bigger than one paper. One to a producer she trusted to cut a trailer that could break an audience's heart in 12 seconds. Is this journalism or a duel? She wondered. The answer felt irrelevant. The next morning, a senator from an allied nation tweeted. A philanthropist chimed in. A celebrity posted a photo with William and a sentence that read like a eulogy dressed in hope. The digital chorus swelled. Meanwhile, in households up and down Britain, people discussed an impolite question at the kettle and the carpool line. If William cannot be king, then who? Names rose like bubbles in a glass. The one who left, the one who stayed, the one who married in, the one who married out. Fair questions, dangerous answers. In Westminster, a seasoned political strategist took a call from an old classmate who now wore a crown-shaped lapel pin. Prepare a briefing, the classmate said. Public sentiment modeling, succession scenarios, messaging risks if Prince William reduces duties indefinitely. The strategist swiveled in his chair. Indefinitely. Model it. Publicly. Privately. Why are you modeling privately what the public will feel? A sigh. Because we have to know where the ground will crack before we step. By early afternoon, the palace issued a second statement, this one with slightly warmer edges. His Royal Highness is humbled by the nation's kindness. He continues to focus on his health and family. In the coming months, other members of the royal family may undertake increased duties to support the crown. There it was. Hidden